everyone. Welcome to the UBC Learning Circle, hosted by the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. We are very excited to have Aaron Nelson-Moody and Elder Gerry here with us today, Gerry Oleman, to have a conversation on healthy Indigenous masculinity. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional, ancestral, unceded, and occupied territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. I would also like to acknowledge the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle. So as a quick reminder to everyone participating today, the topics we cover can sometimes be sensitive or emotionally triggering, particularly I think today we're talking about healthy masculinity. So if you need to engage in some self-care, please do so. Go and talk to a friend, an elder, family member, a counselor, whoever you feel most comfortable and most safe with. So, introductions. My name is Cole. I'm from the Saahiilthit First Nation, and I'll be facilitating the session today, kind of participating in the conversation a little bit, but ultimately leaving as much space as for our two guests here as possible. Other Learning Circle team members in the room today, but off camera, is Cynthia, our production coordinator. If you're on Zoom and you feel so inclined, please introduce yourselves in the chat box so that our guests know who you are and where you're coming from, so that we can all kind of engage in this conversation in circle. So sometimes I do introductions, but today I think that if I'd ever tried to introduce these two people, I'd just be chatting for 5 or 10 minutes straight. So I think I'll let them kind of condense it down and introduce themselves. Can we start with you, Elder?
Yes. Good morning to all of you out there, whoever you are. And I can't see you, so I cannot say it's good to see you, but it's good to know that you're there on this important topic for us as a people. Now, my name here in Coast Salish territory is Saahiilthit. And I just like to say, Musqueam. You know, the people there are so kind and beautiful, and I just want to thank them, you know, for taking me in as an immigrant from Coast Salish territory, Coast Mountain Salish, Statliam. Then I come down this way. Immigrated. I wasn't a refugee. I wasn't running away. I was an immigrant. I was looking for work. And I ended up working here. So I'm Statliam, and my name is Saahiilthit, or Gerry. And I'm a residential school survivor, a Colonial survivor, you know, and but my main interest today is healing. It's time for us to get over the anger, the fear, and the depression, and celebrate survival and celebrate success. Just over the last 2 years, I've been saying, I remember people telling me, elders telling me, hey, whining and complaining isn't our way, you know. So I said, okay. And so now I'm really moving towards being part of the solution. I'm really glad to be invited here to share my thoughts around this important topic. But that's who I am. I have 5 children, 8 grandchildren, 3 great-grandchildren, 3 stepchildren, countless numbers of cousins, all the way from Chehalis, Squaw Band up into Statliam territory, Lilwat, you know, the 11 communities. Merritt, I got cousins in Merritt. So that's who I am in a nutshell.
Sim, Hoichka Homasquim Squatal, Nathan Tawx'sin Yexwulla, Qui Pulton Tinsna, Tina Chandla, Chiachmas, Qui Homotson, Humel. In English, I'm Aaron Nelson-Moody. Most people just know me as Splash, because both my names have that sort of root word, splash, in it, which is kind of a canoe name. And you know, I'm really honored to be here, especially with you know, my adopted father, Saahiilthit.
Mm-hmm.
He's been a mentor and guide for me for many years. Just off the bat, I just want to say, you know, I spent most of my life thinking I had not enough teachings, you know, not enough support, not enough, you know, slaps and kisses from my elders to keep me in line. And you know, especially here in the city, I talk to people, and you know, sometimes they have even less. and in the way of our people. Even if we just have a little bit, it's important to share it. So I'm here to share the little bit that I can today.
That's great. Awesome. Well, thank you both very much for joining us again. So to kick off the conversation, I just want to remind everybody that we are in circle here. So if you have any questions at all or any comments, please put it in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we get to it. So to kind of kick off the conversation, I thought we'd start with really just trying to center us. Like, where are we? Can we start with some definitions? And I just wanted to talk a little bit about what healthy masculinity actually looks like to each of us in turn. And then a follow-up, how does that kind of impact our communities and our loved ones by our relationship to healthy masculinity? So as always, I was wondering if we could start with you, Elder.
Okay.
Start us on the path.
Yes, I was thinking about this once. Cole here asked me why I'd come here. And of course I think about the language. And I asked years ago, how do we refer to a man, a real man? And the word was Saahiilthit, that's a man. And they were respectable beings. At that time, and I knew because I seen them, that these males, these Saahiilthit, it was shameful to lose your control of your emotions, and that you're to be respectful. And most of all, to answer calls of help, when people needed help, to go help them. Because the system was, once you help them, then there's going to be a return eventually when you need help. Whatever it is, hunting, fishing, around funerals, trouble times, good times, those were the men. The Saahiilthit, the real men. And I believe we were all trained to be that way at one time, and we had laws to protect ourselves from ourselves. And how to, I guess some people today call it the protocols, how to be a man in public, and also in the family. That we had these systems in place that would teach, and I believe right from babyhood, they start to teach them their role, and more importantly, their purpose and their responsibility. To help them find that purpose, then teach them about responsibility. That's where we come from. That's a reference point we need to look at, as Indigenous people. We spend far too much time looking at the troubles today instead of looking for what works, what's worked in the past. And I've seen Saahiilthit in my community. They're all gone, long gone now. Kind, soft-spoken men, physically fit, strong, good sense of humor, men. And I remember them. And I was talking to one of my, I guess you could say my cohort, because he's a little bit older than me. And I said, when I was young, like a child, and I listened to these elders, they never used profanity or raised their voice in anger in public. And they were respectful. So that's and I went to live with one of them, and he was telling me about our life and about how important it was to conduct yourself honorably. That if you shamed your family, it was so embarrassing that the family would do everything they can to fix it and to cover it up. And I thought, what a beautiful way. We need to go back to that way, because we're humans. We're all going to make a mistake. But just imagine that thought of people working to cover your shame so it won't hurt anybody again. That's a good thought. That's a good way. And it's one of the things I dream of, that we go back to that. And I encourage that and promote that. Because we fell into the colonial trap And it's not colonial anymore, it's oppression. And I tell people today that we took on the most negative aspects of the colonizer, which was profanity and drinking, the men. And we're still fighting to break that. But we have the shining examples of how to be.
Yeah, I like that. Particularly, I think that point about, masculinity existing within a community, attached to family and interconnected with others. I think that's something that we've definitely lost, and then not just as Indigenous men, but Indigenous people. Society is quite a bit more individualized, I think, than perhaps a lot of our traditional communities were, and it's important, I think, to recognize that being, engaging in healthy masculinity doesn't just impact you; it impacts the community, and I think it has a positive impact. What do you think, Aaron? What is healthy masculinity like to you? I guess?
What is healthy masculinity? It's something we wrestle with all the time. I kind of like that we're using the term masculinity. I remember my elders. I'm just a few years behind Gerry, but when I was being raised, my grandfather would not even let us stay in the house when he spoke our language, and you could see the fear they had that we would repeat a word outside of the house. Anyone with a clipboard or a name tag, anyone from the government who heard us speaking, we were at risk from. So to protect us, they kept us removed from our language. And we, if elders came to visit, we'd be outside in the rain all day waiting for them to leave so we'd go back in the house. It was really awkward. And we didn't understand it at the time, but they were just trying to keep us safe. And later on, trying to learn the language, my elders or our speakers, I could see them wrestling with English. Because it's not a perfect fit. It's not a perfect translation. I remember Leonard George. Like one of our most basic words is stelma, and for the longest time, like Chief Dan George said that meant human being, so we're all saying human beings. And years later, Leonard George said, I don't think that's how that translates. He said, I think it means being human. It's not something you just sort of inherit. It's something that you strive for every single day. It's just one of our most basic words for ourselves, and it was hard to translate because it's I think it's more active in our community when we say stelma. It's people who are every day, pushing themselves a little bit, challenging themselves to be a little bit better. And I think it's a significant difference. So when we talk about masculinity and femininity, I can only really speak from, my perspective. But my teacher was saying that, within us we have a male and female aspect. And he said if a man is uncomfortable with his female aspect, he'll treat all the women in his life badly. So he said we have to feel comfortable with that aspect of ourselves. We also have to feel comfortable with the masculine aspect of ourselves. I don't really know what the Coast Salish women did because our community would separate for parts of the year, and the men would be separate for part of the year, and the women would be separate for part of the year. And they're not telling me what they do with their teachings,
right?
But I've heard stories about what the men did, how they supported each other. We had a separate longhouse near where my grandfather lived when he was younger. I can barely remember the house when I was a boy. It was a little sort of island and a longhouse built on it, and you could paddle your canoe right into it. And it was a men's house. And I remember late Margie Tolman telling me about this place. And she said as a little girl, she was always trying to sneak in to see what the guys were up to and hear them all talking in the language and singing sometimes. And she was really curious. And there was a man at the door, very, very respectful, even to this sort of a nuisance of a little girl, saying, respectfully, the men need to look after each other so that we can be strong, for our children, for our family, for our community, for our relatives. So the men would have this sort of time for themselves to share teachings, and they would really, really look after each other. She was saying that if a young married man was watching young women walk around, paying a bit too much attention to the other young women, all the older men would pull them aside and saying, what's going on in your relationship that you're so distracted? Your focus is elsewhere. And they would, help put him to rights, to make the right decision, for however he wanted to be. And, we don't really have that many men doing that anymore. We certainly don't have a separate house for us to go and look after each other. But she said, maybe it won't be a house in the future. Maybe it'll just be men getting together once in a while. But she said it's absolutely necessary because she said Squamish men were brave, and kind, and funny, and strong. And she said she never remembers a man when she was a girl who did something by himself. A man did something, another man went with him. A bunch of men went with him, to help. And I've heard lots of stories like that too. Anyway, so I like that we're wrestling with, what healthy masculinity, trying to piece together what had been, but in some ways that just informs the questions we have for what it will be now, what it will be in the future. Because we're living, like you're saying, we're living a very different life now. We live in separate houses for the first time in our history. For the first time in our existence, we're living in separate homes. And we're not as familiar with our day-to-day life. So we're wrestling with how to manage that. And like we've never shared teachings over the internet like this before. But there may be one person in every community. There might be one man in a very small community, without contemporaries. So maybe this is the way we connect in today's world.
Yeah. And picking up on the common threads there, it really is masculinity is engaging in healthy masculinity, rather. It does impact the community, and I really like where you went with that in terms of kind of looking to the past to inform decisions on the future, but not necessarily imitating. Do you know what I mean? Because times have changed, we need to adapt to that. But what lessons can we learn from our elders and from the past? So we're going to take a break for a couple questions here. We have quite a few. So Crystal Sparrow, appreciate hearing being the solution and being mentored. How are you teaching these ways today? If so, what does that look and sound like? So I'm interpreting this, and please, Crystal, kind of correct me in the chat box if I'm wrong, but kind of how are the two of you engaging in being mentors and kind of being the solution, engaging in healthy masculinity and kind of spreading that into the community? And that kind of gives us a nice little segue to talk a little bit about the work that we do. Elder, would you like to lead us off on that? Talk about some of the things that you do.
Yes, well, one of my teachers is from Saahiilthit, and the late Bob George, and he said, every time somebody steps on you, if you don't make noise, they're going to keep stepping on you. And, so I make noise today. I go to communities, I go to conferences, and I tell people I come here to assimilate you into indigenous ways of thinking, because we act the way we think. And you mentioned that we cannot go back, and I say, yes, we need to go back to that way of thinking. Of course, we're not going to change all our clothes for cedar bark and deer skins. I know that. But the thinking is critical. So I wanted to, when I started, I used to get depressed that we're losing our ways. And our language, our music, our ceremony, our ritual. This is in the 70s, and I was like, it's in the 70s and early 80s. I was hungry for our way, because I knew the other crazy new way wasn't working for us. So I was living with this elder, and he seen that in me. And he said, Gerry, I notice you're not quite right sometimes. So I told him, I said, I get depressed because our music seems to be slipping away. Hand drums, rattles, in ceremony and ritual. And he said, Gerry, everything you know comes through the air. The teachings come through the air. He says, how do you think they got the music? The song, they went and sat in the trees, out by the water, out in nature, and they listened and they got the music. He says, you can do that too. So I started to have hope again on our way, because I'm a firm believer in our way, and I promote that. And I want to live that. So one of the things I do is I started podcasts. And I remember, 3 years ago, I started talking to people, and I say, you know what, I'd like to be part of a podcast someday. And because I listened to one from New York City, this woman working with prisoners in the penitentiary. And she went in and was directing Shakespeare plays with the inmates. And they're totally hooking into it because one of them committed murder, just like you would, like Macbeth would, or somebody, you know. So and I said, hey, I can get to people on the net because they're all there. So the way to do it is podcasts. So people in Vancouver picked up on it and they heard me. At Vancouver Coastal and PHSA Aboriginal. They said, hey, you still want to do podcasts? I said, yes. So we have podcasts in men's wellness. Now we're moving just to Indigenous wellness. And it's called Teachings in the Air. You know, and I figure we can get to men that way and all Indigenous people plus Canadians. Because I mean it when I say I want to assimilate people. Because our way, you know, and I tell people when we're here by ourselves, there's no extinction. We were taught as men to respect the salmon that we kill, the deer that we kill, the plants we pull out of the ground. That's Indigenous way. And that's a good way. You know, I think we can save the planet with our ways, with climate change and global warming. You know, it's a real concern. But that's some of the things I do. I go to conferences, I help people develop programs. You know, I do keynotes and podcasts and plus webinar. So that's how I'm working at getting the word out and, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it's critical we do this. One of I'll call her my auntie from Saahiilthit. I went up to visit them. And I was there working with the youth. And she come and sit with us. And her and I are having tea. And she says, I'm so glad you're here, Gerry. Because I have the feeling we're running out of time. That our children are losing their ways. And I know she's referring to hip hop and rap culture and stuff like that, right? And she's sincerely worried about it, and I am too. You know, because that's assimilation. If you put other people's music before yours, or even clothing, and jewelry, you know, so yeah, so that's what I do.
Yeah. So Teachings in the Air will definitely we'll have a link for you if you want to check that out. You can. Elder engages in all sorts of different conversations on Indigenous wellness, and I'm sure that would be a really good resource. Aaron?
First of all, Crystal Sparrow, hello. It's nice to hear from you. You know, what can we do? I think, you know, in the end, we want, you know, good men in our families. We want them in the home. And, you know, there's lots of places, there's lots of communities, you know, just in British Columbia, small places. People may be working all the time and, you know, can't make it to, you know, big men's gatherings. It's hard to find, but, you know, if you can't, you know, get to those places, do what you can where you can. Little things add up. Like Gerry said, spend a bit of time on the land. I made the mistake of complaining in front of my elders about how we were losing so much of our culture. And they were just, you know, it's a bad idea to complain in front of your elders. But they were all shaking their heads and said, this isn't all make-believe. Our culture's not just made up. We learned it from the world itself. We learned it from the animals and the plants and the land around us. And they said, if you feel like you're losing it, what you're losing is your ability to reconnect with it. So go sit in the land by yourself. Find some peace in yourself. I can't remember who said this, but there's a quote I liked. Someone was saying, you know, we become a good man by winning small battles of honor every day. So if you're a young man, take the garbage out, you know. Wake yourself up, you know, do your own laundry. Just funny little things, they start to add up. And your friends, you know, will see you as a young man and see your independence, see your strength, and they'll want to emulate you. Slouchy little teenage boys are still elders to the kids below them. You know, those kids will follow the teenage boy. You know, and if you're an older man, and you know, you have that feeling of like guilt or shame or longing, start small, but start. Do even little things will start to add up. For myself, probably the biggest change in my life is when I start after seagoing trip. We paddled to Bella Bella from here, Lisla. And when I came home, our elder said, we're the first people in about 90 years to travel in a traditional way, to go to potlatches, to see the coast, to see the world in an indigenous way. And they'd say it'd be a shame if we kept it all to ourselves. So they asked me to apply to work with our youth. And did the whole thing to get my job, my resume and interview. And they said, before you get the job, because we're willing to hire you, you have to sit with our elders. So when we went and sat with them, and late Margie Tillman again was looking at me, and she was a real sweet little lady, and she was smiling, and she said, it's okay if you get drunk, it's okay if you do drugs and run around and gamble and drive fast. She said, it's okay if you do that stuff, we'll still love you, but we don't want you working with our youth. She said, if you want to work with our youth, you live a good life, because we want the young people not just to copy what you're saying, but we want them to copy what you're doing. And she said, if you say all the good words, sing the good song, and then go back and get stoned, all the kids are going to do what you do. They're going to talk well and then behave badly. So what we really want is better behavior. So she said, if you want to be a role model for our youth, you have to live a good lifestyle, one that we want our youth to emulate. And that was I didn't realize at the time how significant that was, but when I look back on it, every single member of my family, every single teacher I had until my mid-20s was either an alcoholic or a drug addict. And making that shift for me was the biggest, most significant part of my life. And I absolutely don't believe, that everyone's going to make the same decision I made. Maybe they'll simply find some balance, they'll find some health in however they're living their life, or a little bit more health and a little bit more balance. And I think it starts to add up. There's more sober, safe, healthy men in the community now than there's been in a generation. So there's a kind of a momentum building. We're tired of what we were offered by colonial society, and when we look back, we see better men behaving better in our history, and they were happier. They were more successful. They were more accomplished than we were in my generation. So we're looking back to figure out how they did it, I guess. And say we're trying to figure out how they did that stuff and grab it with both hands. Yeah.
Adapt it for our contemporary living, I guess. So the biggest thing I'm kind of taking away from that is, if you find yourself as a young man or a young individual looking to engage in healthy masculinity, I think, as Aaron said, I totally agree. Starting small and focusing in on yourself and the things you can do to be a positive role model and a positive image in the community. It doesn't matter if you're an elder or a teenager. Somebody's going to look up to you, and somebody's going to take that. Someone is always watching. At least I can't speak even on the same level as you guys, but I know that I have 4 nephews now, and I constantly walk a life where I'm aware that they're watching. Even when I don't think that they are, even when I think that they don't understand, they're watching, and it's something that drives me and drives my life, and the way that I try to interact in the world is just would I want my nephews to act in that way? Do you know what I mean? Would I be proud? Would I feel good about that as a role model? And I think if the answer is no, maybe it's time to reevaluate that. So we're having a lot of questions. So I think we'll just kind of keep rolling on with the questions as long as you guys are okay with that.
Yeah.
And we'll get to our own questions in a little while. So the next question comes in from Ivan Voyager. I want to ask, how is the concept of vulnerability, how is that looked at traditionally? Are we aware of that, here in the room today? And in society today, vulnerability is considered as a weakness, but Ivan's been teaching that vulnerability is a strength and a gift between people. I think he's just looking for generally our kind of thoughts and feedback on that. So I'm going to buck the trend a little bit. I'll start with Aaron, then we'll come back to
Yes.
Vulnerability, I guess, is it's sort of a judgmental word, isn't it? I think being open, maybe is the concept there. We're trying to be open. And if you feel, okay with yourself, feel strong in yourself, you feel just like you have some faith that you'll be able to figure things out, I think it's absolutely vital to be open to the world, to say I love you to someone, to give someone a hug, and that's not stuff I learned when I was a boy. We didn't understand how to love each other in a healthy way. It was only much later when it was a big old mess. And I had to figure out a new way of living that I'd kind of opened myself up to the world. It's funny, just coming here, years ago, I went to see a counselor, and the first question was, how are you feeling? And I had absolutely no idea how I was feeling. I was so shut down to protect myself. But being shut down meant I couldn't also accept help or find help.
Mm-hmm.
So all I did was just wall myself off, and there was no help for me. I was just alone inside that wall. So I had to kind of open up, and I was terrified of it because I didn't know what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out when I opened myself up to a lot of good as well. And I had a lot of tears. I had a lot of pain inside. And I opened myself up to finally letting go of that. So it wasn't this burden I had to walk around with every day. So definitely, it's vital to be open to the world. Brené Brown, if you're a reader or just like watching YouTube, look up Brené Brown. And she does a lot of really interesting talks on vulnerability and courage and change. She's the best source I found lately. Men are wrecking the world, destroying the environment, destroying society, and there's surprisingly little effort put into helping them change that.
Mm-hmm.
There's men desperate for a better way, and there's very few resources available, for those men. But if we can help men change, I think we can actually save the planet. And all those men are, feeling fed up, feeling this like, what about me? This sort of desperation for health and happiness and stability and love and all of those things. There's these men looking for that. I think it's vital that we just make it okay for each other to express ourselves, to be open. I find that historically, the one example we had of the men's house, I think men have an easier time doing that amongst each other.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught patriarchy by the women in my family. I was taught to suck it up, swallow it, just man up.
Man up.
I heard women, my family talking about, sissy boys and, cry babies and, just the way they spoke about men distorted my idea of what manhood was. All I heard growing up, and my parents separated, all I heard growing up was how bad men were.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up with this deep shame that I was going to become a man one day and that there's something deeply wrong with me. So before I could even put words to it, I had the sense that just being me was somehow wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, spending time with people like Gerry or Clacton or Tawx'sin, like there's some good men in my life now. Lee Brown, good men in my life these days. And I realized that being a healthy man, being an open man, is absolutely vital, not just for our communities, but I think, like I'm saying, for the entire world, it's vital.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I know that my own dad, his favorite baby picture of me is I'm sitting as an infant and I'm wearing a hat that says "No crybabies" on it, as an infant. So I think that goes a long way in saying kind of how long it's been the colonial society, the patriarchy, however you want to classify it, is kind of putting these really unnecessary and harmful structures and limitations on a man's emotional vulnerability, openness, and his emotional kind of range. The spectrum with which he can express his thoughts and feelings. And I totally agree. I think it's easier for men in general to connect with other men and do that. But again, we have to create that space, and you have to kind of do that of your own accord. And I find that myself generally, the best way to do that is to kind of be the brave one and take that first step out there and be vulnerable with another man. You know what I mean? Or whoever it is. Because I find that when you have that is ultimately bravery. Correct me if I'm wrong here, both of my elders here, but exposing yourself, being open, being true and honest with your emotions, is bravery, and I think that that's something really positive. And if you take that first step, then people are going to reciprocate that, or at least easier, right? It's going to be a little bit easier for people to connect to you. So in terms of a practical instruction, that's what I would recommend. Is just kind of going out there and connecting with people. What are your thoughts on it, Elder? Vulnerability?
Yes, I agree with both of you where it comes from, so I don't have to talk about that. I could add a little more, but I'm not going to. But what I believe is in the way around this, and I listen to teachings again, and they say, be careful and sincere with your words when you speak to others. And that word sincere, that totally means being honest. If you're honest, you cannot help but have emotions come up. If you're honest speaking to someone about, let's say, affection and love. Because I had a hard time with that word. And as I grow, I learn that love is about commitment. Making a commitment to people that this is the way I'm going to be with you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is, and being respectful. I'm going to be respectful with you. I'm going to support you. I'm going to help you. You know, and when you travel, because I started traveling that kind of journey, and I found it is easier for me to be vulnerable, to show my weakness, for instance, or when I need help, and to weep, because it used to be real men don't cry, and that kind of stuff, right? And which is a lie. They're all illusions created by somebody in the past. Illusion means something is not real. Because we have tear ducts, every human being. You know, there's no denying it. I watch guys biting their tongue on the side of their cheek, trying not to show emotions. They want to, in a sense, expose themselves because they've been shamed and humiliated for showing emotions in the past. Well, to get beyond that, we must take this attitude of, I'm going to take risks now. I'm going to be a risk taker and show you my heart. You know, and like you're right, we need to create the environment for that. At the same time, I encourage men, okay, you do it now. You make this commitment. I'm going to be real. And understand that when you feel, you heal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because people also try to hide anger, and that's not healthy either.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and a real anger, like right at the moment when you're angry, to say, you know what, I'm upset with you. I disagree with you. To learn how, like Lee Brown says, we need emotional competency training.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we need to teach people how to deal with their emotions that come up, because we all have them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what we have done is we swallow anger, we swallow pain, we swallow love, and it's just inside of us. And people aren't mind readers. You know, our family and friends aren't mind readers.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to tell them when we're hurting.
Yeah.
Dan George is the one that said, you know, it's not our way to be like the wounded deer and go in the forest and die by ourselves. You know, we're supposed to heal ourselves and help each other to heal.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, so this vulnerability business is important.
Mm-hmm.
But to have role models for it, because I remember the first time I cried in front of a group, 1976. And I was filled with hate and frustration and pain. And I was in a circle, and I started weeping. I put my head down. I was ashamed of myself. And the facilitators from Alberta, a Blackfoot woman, and she says, Gerry, what's going on? I said, I'm just totally ashamed of myself, crying in front of all these men.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, well, ask them. Ask them what, you know, because you're obviously wondering what's going on with them. Are they ashamed of you or what, too? And so I looked at them and I asked them, what do you think about me crying like a baby in front of you? And some of them were saying, that's a real man. I wished I could do that. You know? Yeah. So anyway, that's just an example of my starting to shatter the barriers of not sharing emotions. Because sharing emotions as a human being, that's what it is all about.
Yeah.
Because we help each other carry our hurt when we're grief and loss. People shut down and they just turn to addictions to heal and get violent and stuff. That's a price of not being vulnerable. It's a heavy price. It's had a big toll on our people, our men especially.
Yeah, I really like where you went there with that, Elder. I think that kind of repressing those emotions, they're not going to stay there. You know what I mean? Eventually, it causes distress. It causes destruction on yourself, and that's only going to reverberate out to the people that you love, to the people you're connected with, and to the community at large. Right?
Because thoughts are energy.
Totally. And
And
emotions.
if we don't let it go out, it implodes.
Absolutely. So we have a lot of questions. Everybody's really excited about this. So I apologize that we're kind of moving through it slowly, but we will.
Yeah, we're talking too much. We'll try and keep it short to
We'll try and
statements.
keep it a little bit short.
Making men healthy might take more than that.
Maybe an hour and a half.
We'll do it one word at a time.
So, Elder Woodrow Morrison, thank you very much for joining us. He asked, do we have gender pronouns in our language? And I think what he's getting at there is, are there ways that we would distinguish? Now, myself, I only have a really rudimentary understanding, not because I wasn't educated properly, because perhaps I'm a bad student, of the of the Hunkaminam, of the Downriver dialect. And I know in that language that there are specific adjectives, I guess, and specific ways to address womanhood, that it would be singular feminine or plural female, and then other. So the males would fit in the others, but that there was in Hunkaminam that you can very specifically indicate that something is a woman, or that something is feminine, and then that the men and others would be the gender pronoun that I would know. But elders probably with greater language knowledge, what do you think? Are you aware of it at all?
Squamish is a little bit fun. By the time I came to Squamish language later in life, I started to realize that a lot of our language had been defined by English speakers or shoehorned into English.
Yeah.
And all the baggage that goes with what was a colonial language for us. So the view of manhood, the view of womanhood, the view of the masculine and feminine was shoehorned into concepts that I'm not sure totally reflect our history. And, I know we had male-female roles. I know we had men and women, and we do everything in between. All kinds of combinations. I think the easiest way I can explain it is we tend talk about our canoes for a second. Squamish canoes were painted black on the outside. It's considered masculine, and they're painted red on the inside because it's considered feminine. And they said I think it's an awkward translation, but they said the masculine, sometimes that energy we turn out to the world, to face this harsh world sometimes. But a canoe doesn't go anywhere without that feminine spirit to sustain you, to give you faith, or however you would want to define the feminine. So it was always talked about the sort of balance between the two. So I think when I look at that, just from a carver's perspective, like how the male and the female were all sort of
intertwined.
Yeah, and it's hard to pull them apart into these very different concepts. And I think English does that very quickly. It starts to say there's these hard and fast rules about what gender is, these hard and fast rules about what masculinity and femininity is. So I kind of wonder if it was so rigid historically.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Is that even the language today has been, is definitely impacted by the colonial practices, by colonial practices and the generations that lived through the residential school era to then kind of give us that basis of the knowledge, right? To provide those initial transcriptions and those initial translations for all of us to learn at this point. So certainly, I think that's a factor that we have to consider. Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah,
Elder?
I think one of the big influencers in this topic is Christianity. It's because Christians come in pretty rigid, about male, female. And I know we had roles. There was women's society, men's society. There's songs that only women could sing. There's songs that men sing. There's jobs that men do. There's jobs that women do. But I think we could all do it. I think we're more fair-minded in those days. I know we were. We were fair-minded. It was fair. There's no oppression of women in our society before. Heck, I don't know how many places I go, they say women are life givers. We must respect them. Don't hurt them. We wouldn't be here without them. So they had a special place, and men have a special place too. Yeah. There's balance. Wasn't one above the other. It's just accepted. Okay, that's what the women are doing now. And this is what the men are doing. And we can help each other yet too. It's not rigid. When it's rigid, when you try to over control things, that's when we get in trouble. That's when we get in trouble. I jokingly tell people I'm old school. Because I'm 70 years old. 70 years young. I know there's elders out there. And I say, you know what? I say, those men, they never swear. Those old school men. And they didn't drink and do drugs. And they didn't beat women. They didn't ridicule women. They didn't objectify women. And I think you're right, that comes with the new experience. And we started to get into Euro stuff, Euro-Judeo-Christian stuff. Not condemning it. I don't want you out there that have Christian Judeo roots or inclinations. I've learned that there's evil Christians and good Christians. Evil Indigenous, good Indigenous, everywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm. I think that brings up a really good point too, and we'll snowball into this, but I just wanted to kind of bring it up, is that kind of this cycle, right, of abuse and of trauma that was kind of initiated on Indigenous men and started in residential schools and even before that, right, and how that's kind of, with the subjugation of Indigenous peoples, how that must have impacted the Indigenous masculinity, like as a community, right, the masculine as a community. And what I understand from my elders would have been roles in protecting, and how that would have impacted then their conceptions of themselves, I guess, of their self-worth, after, again, the colonial kind of I don't want to use too many like incendiary words, but we'll just say that the subjugation of Indigenous people, how that must have kind of started this cycle, right, of trauma and abuse. And it's well documented that when you suffer that, then that's something that you can then engage in, right, or that it increases the likelihood of you engaging in that behavior later. And drugs and drinking to kind of mask pain, or to suppress emotions, which is something we've already talked about, right? I think the first step in healing is to kind of be vulnerable, recognize that, accept it within yourself, is that pain and that emotion, and then kind of try and deal with it in a healthy way by connecting to the community, like we've talked about here, and connecting with other men.
Also, we're developed too.
Yeah.
I was having the funny thoughts here, about how men's egos needed to be polished up and lifted up sometimes. It's a need for males, in the sense it's a weakness, but the woman would fix us up and say, oh, my granny would say, oh, son, you're strong, and feel my muscles. Oh, I'll pack you some more water, granny, I remember we killed a deer once, and my mother's whispering to me, get Patrick to carry the liver and the heart for me. Make him feel strong. Mm-hmm. It's building up that male ego, in a good way, to be healthy.
Yeah, totally. On that note, we'll go into the next question here, which was actually from Lindsay Weaver. What do you see as the role for Indigenous women to support and help build up men to express healthy masculinity?
Well, I think the first thing is to say no to abuse. Don't let men abuse you. And prevent your sons, when they're little baby boys and boys, from abusing other human beings. We start putting it in them right away. Women are the first teachers, very first teachers. Mm-hmm. And they can start to do that. And we need to help them with that too, as men. As we must start layering that respect in all of our babies. That respect for self, respect for other being humans, mm-hmm. Plants. My granny wouldn't let me hurt plants when I was a boy, because she knew that the next thing I might hurt is a human being. Mm-hmm. So I think it's in the teachings that we start to layer right away. Prevention is the best medicine. We start teaching right away. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little reluctant to tell Aboriginal women what they ought to be doing, but I can say, like, just to repeat, I was taught, deep shame for being a man. Just as a boy, I had this vision of, I've become something horrible. That was the vision given to me. We talk about what, if you kind of explore what patriarchy is, you start to realize that there's as many women as men engaged in patriarchy. There's lots of women, teaching young men bad behavior. Lots of older men teaching young men bad behavior. We've got more strong, educated, healthy women in our community now than in the last couple of generations.
Oh.
We're doing very, very well. I was taught, my teacher Halacton was saying that he was talking about the men's coming of age training. How we, one of the things we do to become a man from that transition from being a boy to a man. And he said the men's training is much more rigorous. And he said women are more complete in their spirits, women are stronger. And everywhere I've been, Native people talk like that. They say that women are strong, they're life givers. And my teacher was saying, everywhere you go, you'll hear that. And what we used to do in Squamish was the men had this very rigorous training. We pushed ourselves really, really hard to be equal to women. And, he was encouraging me, to step it up, to be a man in today's world, to be an equal man in today's world. We've got to step it up a little bit. We have to push ourselves harder to be there. We want to be there in a traditional way, a historic way, for the women in our community. We have to step it up. So the idea of becoming sober, the idea of training, the idea of working a little harder. And if I have stuff I have to deal with, I go find some men and I ask for help. Men where I come from used to train for their marriage. They would train for their marriage to be the best husband they could be, the best father they could be, the best uncle, the best older brother. Men used to train hard to fulfill those roles. And it's hard to do by yourself. When we talk about sort of vulnerability, reach out. It's hard enough to do in today's world, but it's harder to do by yourself. So find someone, find somewhere. It's a book, it's a video. Just grab onto everything that comes your way with both hands, because it's vital that men step it up to be the equals of the women in our community. You go into any band office, you go into any college room, there's lots of Aboriginal women there. You got to wonder what the Native men are doing. And if you feel like they're not doing enough, help them out. Help raise, boys to be good, strong men. Encourage them, like Gerry was saying, encourage them, to be good, strong men. It's vital in our world. And the women will make up their own minds how they're going to do that. But I got to say, I admire, the pursuit of education. I admire the pursuit of health and well-being in the women's sort of societies. And that just makes me, I feel the challenge, like, for me to step it up to be their equal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point that you kind of brought up, being, having recently graduated from university. It's totally right. In a cohort, I think there was only 2 or 3 of us, Indigenous men here at the university. And UBC is a fairly large university as well, right? Within a year, I think I know all of the Indigenous men on campus. I think I can name them on one hand, at least at an undergraduate level, which is just absurd. When you consider the rising rates of Indigenous people accessing university, and then how small that is, how small of a portion that is that men are.
And maybe that's a sign. It's not that men aren't smart; it's that men need some extra work, we need some help.
Yeah, of course not. But so again, like, how do we kind of engage that as a community, and maybe, like you were saying, Elder, maybe build young men up into thinking that they are smart and that they belong in that arena and that they can exist there, right? I know myself, when I was growing up, it was mostly, the conversations were never, are you going to university? The conversations were, what trade was I going to get? You know what I mean? If I got a trade, you know what I mean? If I graduated high school, and I feel that at times those conversations are framed differently between men and women. You know what I mean? At least myself, growing up in the education system, that's kind of how I felt. But I went to public school. I didn't go to a community school, so maybe that was the difference. I hope that it is a difference. So yeah, on to the next question. Janie, this isn't a question. It's just wonderful to hear from two of the strongest and most beautiful men I know. Janie Chang, thank you for speaking about masculinity. Our men need to hear your words. So thank you very much for that, Janie. I'm glad that we contacted the right man. Crystal has another question. Crystal Sparrow, would you consider starting a men's group in your communities that teach the old ways? I guess I'm assuming the old ways in terms of reconnecting two men. Aaron, I'd like to start with you because I think you kind of are on that path, right?
Yeah, we sort of do that. It's funny. I've been to a few men's conferences, and they were just big old disasters. Like, it wasn't what I was looking for. And I struggled to find a program that fit for me. Just struggled if something fit my time. And we kind of just thought that the least we could do is just get some men together every couple months, whenever we can, have a breakfast, and maybe pass the feather around. Maybe ask one of our brothers if he's okay, because we've seen how he's been behaving, or can see how he's been carrying himself. Just to check in with each other. And it's got to be the smallest idea of a program in existence, but it makes such a huge difference. I see the men, coming to my house sometimes. Just take a breath. This sort of just a little moment of safety. I remember Nolowitz saying to me once, "It takes a strong man to carry a big heart," and it just, I was just longing for that sense of strength, and what it meant was to be like a whole human being. That's what being strong was, thanks to him and Indian Joe for their teachings, right? Just even little gatherings can make a significant difference, because if two men get together and start talking about how to support each other and be healthier and happier, I guarantee you all the other men will notice. And they're going to start to want that. They're going to start to want a little bit more of that peace, a little bit more of that happiness. And you're going to meet all kinds of resistance. Just the other day I was saying, someone saw the ad that I was coming here and started mocking me for talking about healthy masculinity. I thought, what a strange reaction, and what a sad reaction. That someone's trying to stop us from having this conversation right now. Why not say we should talk about this more? We should talk about this more often. We should get together at someone's house, if that's all we have, someone's house, and a bit of bacon and toast. Let's have a conversation and make it better. That's what we had historically. We had a whole house for it historically, but maybe in today's world, it's just going to be little gatherings here and there. Yeah, and maybe that's enough.
I really believe in what my son is saying there. We're starting small. But I've been to men's conferences, and the wonderful Carrier people had one called Warriors of the North, and we got together and we're having circles. And I always encourage people, when you have a circle at a conference, always pare it down to 12 men in a circle. Because if we try and listen to everybody in that hall, it gets sort of long and stuff, and people get restless. But we started by talking single topics, like we're in this one circle. And we said, okay, we're going to talk about our fathers. And that's a triggering thing for a lot of men, because some of the fathers were abusive and stuff. But I could see people freeing themselves. And my belief, as soon as you speak the truth sincerely to people, 50% of the stress leaves your body. Then you might have the wherewithal to deal with it, that other 50% of that stress, and get it over once and for all. I think all circles and all men's gatherings should have the intention of once and for all, we're going to deal with our fear, anger, and depression. As males, as masculine guys, because that's what stops our growth. Fear, anger, or depression. So if we're going to talk about anger, about residential school or colonialism, let's put it in our mind, we're going to talk about this once and for all, and it's going to be gone. Intentional. Because if we just reaffirm everybody's anger and they go home angrier than when they come in, what's that doing? That's silly. I've been part of that circle kind of stuff. I'm not putting down all those circles I've been part of. I've been part of so many circles. But I learned over years that we must make them intentional. healing circle. Make it intentional so someone there will have their voice and be able to speak the truth and be vulnerable and free themselves and let it go. Freedom is such a wonderful experience, to be free. When I became free of my abusers in residential school, it's like I was in heaven. And I don't know what heaven is, but it was about this good feelings and about free,
Yeah.
And that's what I see men's groups doing. I'm developing a little way of having men's groups. I'm encouraging people 45 minutes max. Get them together and talk about one topic intentionally. Let's say love. Oh, I struggle with love or whatever. What I love. And just do 45 minutes, because do it short so they'll want more. And then say, okay, now we're gonna end. Now we're gonna have food, and we're gonna eat, play cards or whatever. Like at men's, I was listening to my son talk about. In my community, they used to call it smokers' night, when all the men would get together and they'd play cards. And they would. And I didn't know I was just a little boy, but I guess they're talking men's issues. Yeah. So we used to have them, and that doesn't mean we cannot have them again.
Yeah.
Somebody has to start it.
Somebody has to start it. It sounds like both of you are doing a lot of work in your respective communities, and that's amazing. I think that the one thing that we can all kind of take away from that is that you're going to see success if you take that first step and make yourself vulnerable and open yourself up to having a circle, to taking the charge of it. If it's a change that you want to see within yourself, within your group of male peers, or within your community at large, take it upon yourself to kind of start that, because I think that based on the success of the two kind of programs that you guys have started, and the years of work, then almost a lifetime, I'm sure, between the two of you, of trying to work through these things with yourselves and with the men around you, you're going to have people are going to be receptive to those sorts of conversations. It might start small, and like Aaron mentioned, some people might kind of look down their nose about it, at you about it, but eventually it's going to be for the good, and they'll come around, right?
Yeah. I just want to let you know that I have been part of successful men's camps and circles. Not that many, because I go to workshops in communities all across the country, and 89-90% female women coming to the workshop. You go to any program, like you're saying, social work or whatever. So they ask me, do you know how we can work with men? I said, yes, but then the problem is how to get them there. That's what we have to approach. How to do it. And, the men's breakfast is one of the best ways, I think. Or go out in the campfire by the lake or the river and say, hey, we're having a picnic, or not called a picnic for men. We have food out there. Let's go out in the forest and sit around the fire.
I find generally people are more open to talking about things when there's a task for them to do, right? Whether that's playing with their hands or eating something, it's always easier to share.
Well, I'm engaged in a lot of wood carving, and hardly anything brings out the community like a project like that. It's a big enough project so that people know that you need help, and people are generous. They'll come around and they'll want to help, and while you're kind of sitting around that whatever you're making, people it's time to speak. So I'm a little bit strict around my carvings, like we don't listen to music and there's no drugs or alcohol around. And while we're there, people get the sense that we're going in a certain direction, and people are generally happy to engage in that, happy to help out. And it's much less risky feeling to go help someone carve a totem pole than it is to walk through a big door that says counseling on it sometimes. Just everything you do. A lot of I didn't have a father around to help me learn how to chop wood or make something. So I had kind of a Frankenstein version of a father in my head. I'd meet someone, admire a thing they did, meet someone else, admire something they did, and I kind of put it together in this idea of manhood. And I tried to piece together the sense of healthy masculinity, mostly because I didn't have a living example in my life. My grandfather was an amazing man, but he didn't know how to live sober. He didn't know how to live as a sober man. If he had it, I'm sure he would have given it to me because he loved us. But I had to piece together how do you if alcohol is your only medicine, what's a better medicine? What's a more sustaining medicine? What's a medicine with fewer side effects?
Mm-hmm.
And my family just didn't have that to share with me at first. So I had to just, go seek people out. Gerry, our elders from Saahiilthit and Lee Brown, those guys. They were super generous with their teachings, and I think that's worth it. It's worth being an older brother. It's worth being an uncle to the young men around us. Ask them to step it up.
Yeah. I think that kind of snowballs into the next question from Crystal Howard, who asks, what would you suggest as a starting point to motivate and support a man or men to empower themselves? Just kind of going off of what you said there, and I think kind of a big part of it is to decide like kind of what kind of man do you want to be, right? Sit down with yourself and have that conversation. Look for role models, look for people that you can emulate or traits that you admire, and then think about how you can implement those in your own life. What do you guys think?
Well, my approach is never ever approach a man and say, hey, we're going to talk about addictions or we're going to talk about abuse or residential school. Never do that.
Yeah.
And I've said, hey, you want to go fishing? We're going to go live down the Fraser River and we're going to cut fish. Okay. And I said, bring your whole family. This is something that actually happened. And this guy was couldn't hold a job. They'd give him a job, he'd sleep in, and they kept trying to help him in my community. And so they said, okay, Gerry, you're the last, because the social worker's going to move in and take the children. You're the last kick at the can here. I said, oh, okay. So I went up to him and said, I'm going down the Fraser River next week and go fishing, and I want you to come with me. Take your kids and your wife. So we go down the river and we set up camp, make a drying rack, and we're catching sockeye salmon, and I teach them how to cut. I teach them how to build a rack. I let them use my net and knives, and camp stove and everything. And one night a run comes in. We catch, 100 salmon. We're there cutting by coal oil lamp, and his children are sleeping under the rack. We're cutting his twan and hanging it. And he says to me about 1 o'clock in the morning, he says, Gerry, is half of that really mine? I said, yes, that's what I told you. He says, I didn't own a knife, I don't own a net, I didn't have a thing, and half of that is mine. I said, yes, my man of my word, I told you, when you come, half of it's you, because you're going to help me.
Mm-hmm.
Then after that, we're cutting fish. And he looks at me and he says, Gerry, I cannot go to sleep until after 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, really? And he says, yeah, I've been like that since St. Mary's Residential School. And he says, between midnight and 2 o'clock, this priest would come and get me and carry me from my bed and rape me. If I told him, hey, let's talk about abuse and stuff like that, he would have never done that with me. I'm convinced.
Mm-hmm.
The way is to make that connection of trust in doing something that's non-threatening, and then when they're comfortable, they start to speak the truth. They get vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
I've done that with men around wood cutting, fishing, sports, different things.
Yeah.
The Eurocentric way is to sit down and say, okay, we're going to talk about anger management now because you got angry in the band office last week. So that's what we're going to do now. So the guys shut off already, saying, what do you mean I'm angry? If I'm angry, I got a right to be angry,
Yeah.
So that's my take on it, and that's from experience. And when I work with people, I don't go after the problem right away. I'll let them take it out themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned that after I've been working in the field since '76. Mm-hmm. By the '90s, I'm starting to learn how to work really.
Yeah.
So that's my way. I don't know if it makes sense to people, but that's my way.
I have to agree. I mean, there's lots of situations where I was, a lot of men get mocked. Like I was being mocked just the other day. Mm-hmm. As a grown man, it kind of bugs me, irritates me.
Yeah.
If I were my younger self, that would have totally cut me off. I wouldn't have come. I would have been scared to be humiliated once more. In a lifetime of humiliations, the last thing I wanted was one more. So, a safe place, someone you feel trust with, and you work together, and you get to know each other, and you get to trust each other. We did a carving project with some young men. We made spindle whorls. Saahiilthit. Spindle whorls were the tools that women use to spin and put the wool together for our Coast Salish blankets. And I was working with a group of young people, and we said we're going to follow some real Coast Salish teachings here. We're going to make a real Coast Salish thing, use Coast Salish art, and we're going to give it to a woman that we care about, because that's what men did. They supported this work that women did. By the least we can do is make the tools for them, because they're doing all that work. And one of the young men was saying, my mom abandoned me, foster mother mistreated me, and had one story after another of how women had hurt him in his life. And you can see the anger in him. And he said, I'm not going to give this to a woman. It's like, well, you don't have to. You don't have to take a Coast Salish carving class. There's probably other carving classes you can go to, but this is the way Coast Salish do it. We'd love to have you take part, and you don't have to think about who it is right now. Well, while you're making it, I think it'll occur to you. And he was, real grumbling, but he really wanted to take the class. So after a couple classes, he said, my grade 5 teacher was always really good to me. And he said, do you think it'd be okay if I gave that to her? And he was an older teenager then, and he had this living example of a person, this woman, who treated him really well. Yeah. So he invited her in, stood her up in front of the class, and told her, of all the women in my life, you're the first one to be kind to me. You're the first one to encourage me. And you could see that healing moment for him. He couldn't, after that, he could never say that all women treated me badly. He could say there was one, and they're going to find more women like that in my life. So he gave this to her, and it was really nice for her, as a teacher. The kids passed through her life, but she got to see what happened, how her words had made a big difference in his life. And the activity, within our traditional activity, within this activity, especially a lot of young men like to do, again, there was a sort of reciprocal relationship between the men and the women, just built into the object itself. And, it's not like I made that thing up. That's how it's been done for a long time. And now I understand why it was done that way, to further cement the relationships and the mutual support of the male and female in our community.
Yeah, that was really nice. It's kind of snowballing off that a little bit. Eric Anderson asking from South Center, the collective idea of masculinity is evolving, and I think we've kind of touched on this a couple times in the panel. What do you think the new model of masculinity will look like moving forward in the day and age of kind of the multi-gender era, as Eric Anderson said? I would say the spectrum era. But, kind of, I guess, what do you think the new model of masculinity will look like? I think, I'll go first because I think my thoughts are quite short on this, and then I'll leave it to the more experienced and the wise to answer the question. But I think that...
That was a nice way of putting it.
Yeah. Ultimately, I don't know if, phrasing it as the new model, I actually think it's more just kind of coming back around to proper teachings of masculinity and understanding a little bit like what we talked about in the beginning, Aaron, about, the masculine and the feminine existing in all of us and kind of complementing each other as entities nicely in each person. I think what we're looking, at least from my perspective, the new age of what healthy masculinity is going to look like is a more balanced approach to masculinity and femininity within each man, and kind of embracing the feminine side, whereas, before, like in my father's generation, and I'm sure in yours, it was heavily beaten down. We're not talking about emotions, nobody's expressing themselves, you're not allowed to cry in public, those sorts of things. And not that they're inherently feminine or that they exist outside of masculinity, but just that I think that kind of the new age or moving forward, I'd like to see men being a little bit more open and honest with themselves emotionally and with each other, connecting. And that leads to all sorts of really, really positive changes, I think, in terms of supporting each other and engaging in community, activities, coming and helping with a canoe, less of an individualized approach and more of a community approach. And I think you get there by engaging with a healthy balance of masculinity and femininity in each individual, myself, or however you would like to term those two, kind of the feminine and the masculine energies within each person. So really quick and short, what do you guys think about it? What does masculinity look like moving forward? I guess in an ideal world, what does healthy masculinity look like to you?
I kind of think, like you're saying, I think, I kind of think we're getting back to something, more traditional in some ways today.
Yeah.
Lately, so this colonial era of Canada, people's freedoms sort of be tied to their gender. I think for the first time for us, their legality to even exist. Just here, was it yesterday? Homosexuality was made punishable by death, and I can't remember which country.
Yeah.
By
stoning. Yes.
It's I don't understand that at all. There's nothing like that in our culture, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
So the people wrestling over their proper gender is they're wrestling for the right to exist in this country. And I think historically, I'm not sure. As far as I can tell, we didn't tie anyone's right to exist to what their particular gender or sexuality was. I can't see the point of anything like that. I think I think every human being has uniqueness and richness and diversity and beauty, and they absolutely have the right to exist. And it sort of behooves me to recognize their right to exist. It's got nothing to do with some of the gender stuff that has been imposed on us. Some of the masculine, feminine stuff that's been imposed on us. Of course, we all look at women as being the life givers in our community, and in a lot of Salish territories, they're like the female wolf. They're kind of in charge, and Salish men, Squamish men, we weren't threatened by that. They did their stuff, we did our stuff, and we weren't wrestling over any rights. In today's world, I think unfortunately, some of that stuff is tied all in one weird bundle. But to separate it back out and get back to our original culture, because as a strong man, I shouldn't be threatened by anybody. Squamish men didn't feel threatened by anybody. We were fierce and strong and loving and kind, and able to be wherever they wanted to be, and that didn't have much impact on us, because we knew who we were.
Yeah.
We certainly weren't telling them how to live their lives. We weren't telling them how to live their lives.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially like in terms of kind of being comfortable with yourself, and then thereby you can't be threatened. I really like that. Elder, what do you think?
I think it's like we're moving forward, and as we go, we're picking up teachings, and to me, the best teachings are from our elders, my elders, and how to be being human. That's where we need to go to. The crazy new way I call the way that's been put on us, because we didn't ask for this. We didn't ask for residential school reservations or language or names even. They were put on us. And one of the things that's been put on us, I think, has really slowed down and stunted our growth as a people, is they taught us how to other people. Oh, you're too short, you're too tall, or you're gay, or you're trans, or whatever. Or you're vulnerable. That's othering. And it's not our way to other people. If they're handicapped, we accept that and we respect them. I know that's a statute way. Not to other people. That's going to be so when they learn that, to be respectful, you don't other people, you don't put people down. Be careful with them. I remember some of the teachings the elders would say, you don't holler and rage and swear at people, you're going to shorten their life. And I used to think, that's silly, how I'm going to shorten their life. And it's because stress. We didn't have degenerative diseases before contact with Europeans. That means we didn't have heart disease, cancer, diabetes, those kinds of things. And I believe it's because of the way we're taught how to live. That you don't other people. You respect people for who they are. And you support everyone that's in your group. Because I know some people would say, oh, such a wishy-washy way of thinking, but I know. But at the same time, we did have conflict, but we had ways of resolving it. Like we had conflict with the Chilcotins where I'm from. To the death conflict, before contact. We were killing each other, Yeah. But when we're saying moving forward, I don't want to say it's a new way. I always phrase it as we're going home.
Mm-hmm.
My brother had a dream. He says, Gerry, we won. And we're standing straight, and we look good, and we're starting to wear buckskin and our things again. And I really appreciated that dream.
Mm-hmm.
And I reflect on that dream sometimes when things get heavy or the determinants get too much. We're overrepresented in this and that, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you both very much for your thoughts on that. I think it was really nice. Yeah, so we'll have probably time for one more question. I sincerely apologize for everyone that has asked questions. I'm sure that we can continue the conversation in some other space, and we'll talk about that later on. So I'm just going to swing through. Let's take a question from Joseph Sullivan. What would be your main message for men exhibiting unhealthy masculine behaviors in quotations and are wanting to better their relationships with themselves and those they love? So kind of what is our main message, I guess, for those of us that might be struggling and looking to engage in more healthy masculine behaviors?
That's a real good question. It is. Because it's making me think, you know, what do we say to men that are struggling? I always remind them where we come from. And now, like in some of my podcasts, I say, if I want to be Statslium 24/7, you know, I have to have respect. It's a necessity for me to respect myself and respect others.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that, there's benefits to it. You know, and one of the, I think, in our way, with someone that's displaying negativity, we would make every effort to help them to free themselves of that.
Mm-hmm.
By hiring a shkwana'am or, you know, somebody to come and talk to them, you know, there'd be efforts made to help that individual. You know, because in my language, they say they're pilp, they're lost. So we have to try and help them find themselves again, because they're not themselves anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They're violent, they're lying, they're depressed, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And reach out. And, you know, I was told that when you see somebody suffering, you go beside them and you let them know, if you need a hug, I'll give you a hug. If you need to talk, I'll listen. But also, I'm just going to be here to support you. And I've done that with men.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep quiet. After 4 or 5 minutes, this guy, one man started to talk. And what a shame he was feeling. Because we thought he was angry. But he was ashamed, and he was wondering if people would ever like him again. Or his family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that has been my most effective approach, other than say, okay, let's go fishing. Literally give them the message, okay, I'm here to support you. If you want a hug, a lot of guys aren't into hugging, you know, but I still say that. Or you want to talk, I'll listen to you. If not, I'm just going to be here to support you for a while, okay? And I found that just worked.
Yeah, I really like that, coming alongside the individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's never trying to avoid that confrontation of people needing to bring something out of themselves. Just kind of come alongside them and let them come at it in their own way. What do you think, Aaron?
You know, I think, you know, as Aboriginal people, we've had a belly full of someone telling us how to live, you know, how to behave, what to believe in, you know. And whether it's right now or not, whether good teachings or not now, I think you know, it's hard for us to hear anyone say what we ought to be doing. I think, you know, honesty, you know, it takes a lot of courage to be honest.
Yeah.
You're the first person in your family to sober up. It's like you're turning on the light switch in a room nobody wants to see what's going on.
Yeah.
And you're not popular for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people try to pull you back down, you know, get you back in their lifestyle so that they don't feel the threat to change.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you sober up, then I start to feel bad about myself because I know I'm shameful about how I'm behaving.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not really popular when you do that. But what Gerry was saying about his elder, like, you know, telling him how strong he was and stuff, like, you know, just every day, just point out what people are doing right.
Mm-hmm.
Saying, you know, I loved it when you
Yeah.
did that. I loved it when you helped your auntie there. I loved it when you brought, you know, your uncle some food at the feast. Just keep encouraging the good behavior.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, you'll have to tell someone, you know, I don't think you're behaving.
It's not our way.
Yeah, like, you know, you can do more, right? You're worth more than this kind of lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
We went to pull our brother aside once and say, you know, we noticed that you're drinking a lot, and we worry about you. We love you, and we worry about you, and because we know that, you know, maybe there's something going on,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe this is the only medicine you have, and there's better medicine for you than this alcohol. We can't tell you how to live, but we want to tell you that we love you and we're worried about you.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, really stubborn, really resistant, and then hurt us. You know, a while later he hurt us because he didn't want us telling him what to do, but he heard us telling him that we loved him, and you know, we were challenging him to behave better in a loving way, and he did. He stepped it up, and he found more balance in his life. He's not sober because he doesn't want to be sober, like he still drinks, but he's got balance now,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, safety in his life, which is, I think, all we really wanted.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. It's not always the way that people live their lives. Is ultimately, it's totally their decision, and I think that the best thing that we can do is come alongside them and support them, as you said, Elder, and as you talked about, Aaron, in making healthier choices, maybe, and finding some balance. I think, unfortunately, I really have to apologize. Everybody, you're all really fantastic, and I appreciate all of the engagement in the conversation. We'll have to do this again sometime, I think, because I think we must have missed probably at least 5 or 6 really, really great questions that I'd love to talk about more. But we have to wrap up. Aaron and Elder Gerry's time is very valuable. So I just wanted to say thank you again to everybody today for kind of participating in the conversation and for kind of hearing our thoughts. Quick plug for the Learning Circle before we let you go. We have a really busy month planned. Next week we're going to talk about the Silent Genomes Project and kind of how that can interact and impact communities. I'm really excited about that conversation. And then after that, we're kind of going full bore into our birthing sessions. And those sessions will be focused around birthing within the community and how that can, and traditional doulas and midwives today, and how we can kind of integrate that into a better, like, healthier birthing community. So I'm really excited about those sessions. Thanks again, Aaron, Elder Gerry. I really appreciate it. I think it's going off in the chat right now. Justin, thanks, Splash and Old Man. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for being out there.
Hey, Jenny. Hey, Janina.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.